If anyone ever tells you that love cannot accidentally change history, they have never watched an Alpha King plan a quiet vacation. Dawn painted the palace towers with soft gold as Amelia Blackwood stood on the marble balcony, breathing in the cool mountain air that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. For the first time in months, the royal courtyard below was unusually peaceful. No council members hurried between buildings. No messengers raced across the stone paths. Even the royal guards seemed confused as they watched their king walk through the gates wearing a simple travel coat instead of ceremonial armor. Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King feared across countless territories for his wisdom and unwavering resolve, smiled with a warmth reserved for only one person. His silver eyes found Amelia before she even called his name, and every burden he had carried seemed lighter in that single moment. "Ready?" he asked, holding out his hand. Amelia laughed softly. "You dismissed your entire escort. Half the council probably thinks you've lost your mind." Ethan shrugged with effortless confidence. "Then they can spend a few days wondering. I promised my wife a real trip, not another royal parade." She slipped her hand into his, unable to hide her smile. Their marriage had survived ceremonies, political negotiations, endless responsibilities, and expectations that came with ruling the largest wolf kingdom on the continent. Yet somehow the simplest gift Ethan could offer was something neither of them had enjoyed in years: privacy. No titles, no formal dinners, no endless lines of nobles waiting to present petitions. Just two people escaping into the wilderness together. They left before sunrise, riding side by side beneath towering evergreens as morning light filtered through the branches in shimmering ribbons. Amelia's white cloak fluttered behind her while Ethan occasionally glanced toward her instead of the trail ahead, earning playful warnings that he should watch where he was going. "If we get lost," she teased, "history will blame the king." "History has blamed kings for worse things," he replied with an amused grin. The forest welcomed them with birdsong, sparkling streams, and winding trails that seemed untouched for generations. They stopped beside a crystal-clear creek barely 20 feet wide, where Ethan unpacked fresh bread, berries, cheese, and warm cider prepared before sunrise by the palace kitchen. Amelia sat on a smooth stone, letting the cool water brush against her fingertips while sunlight danced across its surface. "I almost forgot the world could be this quiet," she whispered. Ethan looked at her instead of the landscape. "I didn't." She turned toward him, surprised. "Every meeting I attended," he admitted, "every treaty I signed, every decision I made. I kept thinking about this day." Amelia's eyes softened as she rested her forehead against his shoulder. They stayed there listening to nothing except flowing water and distant birds, unaware that somewhere beyond the trees, ancient border markers had long ago fallen beneath moss, storms, and forgotten time. Hours later, the trail narrowed into rolling hills covered in wildflowers. Ethan unfolded an old leather map that had belonged to generations of kings. The faded ink suggested a simple shortcut leading toward a secluded lake perfect for watching the moon rise. Amelia trusted the map as completely as she trusted the man beside her. Neither noticed that the weathered parchment no longer matched the living world around them. Together they guided their horses across a shallow river no deeper than a foot, laughing as cool water splashed against their boots. The moment both horses reached the opposite bank, a distant horn echoed through the valley. Then another answered. Ethan slowly lifted his head. Amelia followed his gaze toward the ridge ahead where unfamiliar banners rose above the trees, fluttering against the afternoon sky. The echo of the horns rolled across the valley again, deeper this time, carrying a sense of urgency that instantly transformed the peaceful afternoon into something neither Ethan nor Amelia had expected. Their horses shifted uneasily as dozens of figures emerged along the ridge, each carrying tall banners embroidered with a silver falcon soaring above emerald mountains. Amelia slowly lowered the hood of her white cloak, studying symbols she had never seen before. Ethan reached into his saddlebag and unfolded the weathered map once more, tracing the faded lines with careful fingers. His calm expression changed ever so slightly. "That cannot be right," he murmured. Amelia guided her horse closer. "What is it?" He compared the river behind them with the ink drawn across the parchment. "According to this map, we should still be inside our northern forests. Amelia looked beyond the ridge where ancient stone pillars stood half-hidden beneath climbing vines and thick moss. Unlike the border markers they knew from home, these carried carvings of soaring birds instead of wolves. "Ethan," she whispered gently, "I do not think this map has been correct for a very long time." Before he could answer, another horn sounded from somewhere much closer. Riders appeared from both sides of the valley, wearing polished green cloaks over light traveling armor. None of them pointed weapons. Instead, they formed a wide line across the trail, as if politely preventing strangers from traveling any farther. Their captain urged his horse forward until only a few yards separated the two groups. His eyes widened the moment he recognized the silver wolf crest stitched onto Ethan's travel cloak. Surprise quickly replaced caution. "State your names and your purpose," the captain called with measured confidence. Ethan answered without raising his voice. "I am Ethan Blackwood. This is my wife, Amelia. We believe this trail remained within our own territory." Silence swept across the valley. Several riders exchanged stunned looks before one quietly turned his horse and raced back toward the distant fortress visible above the trees. The captain inhaled slowly as though choosing every word with care. "Your Majesty, if you truly are Ethan Blackwood, then you crossed into the kingdom of Ashmere nearly 15 minutes ago." Amelia blinked in disbelief. "That is impossible." The captain gestured respectfully toward the moss-covered pillars lining the hills. "The border changed after the Great River shifted many years ago. Most modern travelers use the southern road now." Ethan folded the ancient map with a faint smile that carried more amusement than concern. "Apparently my ancestors left me many things. Updated maps were not among them." Even the captain could not hide a brief smile before duty returned to his face. "I believe your arrival was an accident, but the watchtowers have already sounded the royal alarm." Amelia looked toward the horizon where more banners appeared one after another, their colors catching the afternoon sun. Smoke rose from distant signal fires while bells echoed faintly through the mountains. News was traveling much faster than horses ever could. Ethan exhaled quietly. "How many people know we are here?" The captain hesitated. "By now, probably the entire border command." Amelia glanced at her husband, trying to read the thoughts behind his steady silver eyes. She knew that in every neighboring kingdom, stories about the Alpha King had grown larger with every passing year. Some believed he traveled with thousands of soldiers. Others imagined he never left his palace without an army. Very few would believe that the most powerful ruler on the continent had crossed an international border carrying nothing more dangerous than a picnic basket, an old map, and a promise to give his wife one peaceful weekend together. Far beyond the valley, another signal fire ignited on the highest tower, and before the last ribbon of smoke disappeared into the afternoon sky, the first message reached the foreign capital. The Alpha King had entered their kingdom. Amelia had witnessed crowded royal ceremonies, tense negotiations, and halls filled with powerful leaders, but nothing compared to the strange silence settling over the valley now. The foreign captain remained courteous, yet every passing minute brought more riders to the surrounding hills. None shouted. None acted with hostility. They simply watched, waiting for orders that had not yet arrived. Ethan remained remarkably calm, standing beside his horse with the same quiet confidence that had steadied an entire kingdom through years of uncertainty. Amelia admired that about him. He never allowed fear to decide before facts had a chance to speak. The captain returned after a brief conversation with one of his scouts and offered a respectful nod. "Your Majesty, our commanders request that you remain here until representatives from the capital arrive. They wish to avoid misunderstandings." Ethan answered without hesitation. "That is reasonable. We have no intention of traveling farther." Amelia smiled gently at the captain. "Thank you for believing this was an honest mistake." The man gave a polite bow. "Your Majesty, I have served on this border for 12 years. Travelers who intend harm rarely introduce themselves by name." His words eased the tension for a moment, but the world beyond the valley was already moving much faster than anyone standing there could imagine. Nearly 60 miles away, inside the royal palace of Ashmere, ministers rushed through marble corridors carrying reports sealed with the crest of the border command. Courtiers whispered as each messenger repeated the same unbelievable sentence. The Alpha King of Blackwood had entered their kingdom without warning. By sunset, the story had already begun changing. Some claimed hundreds of royal guards had crossed the border. Others insisted thousands of soldiers waited just beyond the hills. One frightened merchant even swore he had seen enormous wolves surrounding the forests, although he had never traveled anywhere near the frontier. Rumors spread faster than truth ever could. Meanwhile, Ethan unfolded the faded map again, studying every worn crease. "I should have replaced this years ago," he admitted with an embarrassed smile. Amelia leaned against his shoulder. "You trusted something passed down through generations. That is hardly a crime." "Perhaps not," he replied, "but I suspect my council will disagree." She laughed softly. "Your council worries if the weather changes." Ethan could not help laughing with her. Even several foreign soldiers exchanged amused glances. It was impossible to reconcile the relaxed husband standing before them with the legendary ruler described in stories throughout neighboring kingdoms. Amelia noticed the expressions on their faces and quietly realized something important. Most of these people had feared a legend rather than knowing the man himself. Ethan spent the next hour speaking with the border captain about mountain trails, fishing streams, and the wildlife that wandered between both kingdoms every spring. The conversation felt so ordinary that Amelia almost forgot where they were until another group of riders appeared from the western road. Unlike the border guards, these newcomers wore elegant navy cloaks trimmed with silver thread, their horses decorated with the royal crest of Ashmere. The officer leading them slowed to a respectful stop several yards away before carefully dismounting. His expression remained composed, but surprise lingered in his eyes as he looked from Ethan to the simple travel packs resting beside two horses. "Your Majesty," the officer said with a courteous bow, "our king requests the honor of welcoming you to Ashmere." Amelia exchanged a curious glance with Ethan. Neither of them had expected an invitation. Yet something in the officer's careful tone suggested this meeting would determine far more than the outcome of one unexpected vacation. The road to Ashmere's capital wound through rolling green hills, ancient oak groves, and peaceful villages where curious faces peeked from windows as the unexpected procession passed by. Amelia noticed that every traveler who recognized the royal crest on Ethan's cloak reacted the same way. They stopped walking. Conversations faded. Parents quietly guided children closer. It was not fear she saw in their eyes. It was uncertainty. Legends had traveled much farther than the man himself. Ethan rode beside her at an easy pace, occasionally admiring the landscape, as though he truly were nothing more than a visitor enjoying a quiet holiday. Amelia smiled to herself. She had married a king, yet moments like these reminded her she had also married someone who genuinely loved discovering new places, tasting unfamiliar food, and speaking with ordinary people whenever duty allowed. As the sun drifted lower across the western sky, the white towers of Ashmere appeared beyond a sparkling lake, rising above stone walls wrapped in flowering vines. Colorful banners danced in the afternoon breeze while elegant bridges connected different sections of the city across gentle canals. Amelia had expected a fortress built for war. Instead, she found a kingdom that celebrated beauty. Fresh flowers decorated balconies. Musicians filled open squares with cheerful melodies, and merchants welcomed visitors with warm smiles despite the extraordinary circumstances. Their arrival at the palace gates drew respectful silence from everyone gathered nearby. Royal attendants stepped forward with graceful bows before leading Ethan and Amelia through wide courtyards paved with polished stone. Every detail reflected generations of careful craftsmanship, from carved marble fountains to stained glass windows glowing with amber light. The atmosphere felt formal but never unfriendly. At the end of the grand entrance hall stood King Adrian Hawthorne of Ashmere. He appeared close to Ethan in age, tall, composed, and dressed in deep blue robes embroidered with silver thread. His expression carried curiosity rather than suspicion. Beside him stood Queen Eleanor Hawthorne, whose welcoming smile immediately eased much of Amelia's nervousness. King Adrian descended the final steps himself instead of waiting upon the platform. "Your Majesty," he said warmly, extending his hand toward Ethan, "I believe history has delivered us the most unusual diplomatic visit either of our kingdoms has ever experienced." Ethan accepted the greeting with an amused smile. "I wish I could claim it was carefully planned." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the hall, easing the last traces of tension. Queen Eleanor approached Amelia, and embraced her with sincere kindness. Any wife who survives an unexpected international incident on her vacation deserves tea before explanations. Amelia laughed softly. I could not agree more. Within minutes they found themselves seated around a long table overlooking the palace gardens, where steaming tea, fresh pastries, fruit, and honey filled the afternoon with comforting aromas. Ethan carefully placed the ancient map across the polished wood. King Adrian examined the faded parchment before quietly shaking his head. This map belongs to another century, he said. The river changed its course after a series of floods decades ago. Both kingdoms updated their borders, but many older royal archives still contain copies like this. Ethan sighed with playful resignation. Then I owe my librarians an apology for trusting dusty shelves more than current records. Even King Adrian laughed. Yet before anyone could continue the conversation, a senior advisor hurried into the room, carrying several sealed messages. His face remained composed, but concern lingered in his eyes. He whispered something into the king's ear. Adrian's smile slowly faded. He looked toward Ethan with quiet regret. It appears the rumors reached neighboring realms before the truth did, he said. Several kingdoms now believe your unexpected arrival was the beginning of a military advance. We know it was an accident. Unfortunately, the rest of the continent does not. The atmosphere inside the palace changed almost instantly. Only moments earlier, warm conversation and gentle laughter had filled the sunlit room. Now every advisor studied the sealed letters resting on the polished table, as though each carried a little more uncertainty than the one before it. Amelia watched King Adrian quietly dismiss several attendants before breaking the final wax seal. His eyes moved across the page, and although his voice remained calm, concern settled over every word. Neighboring kingdoms have begun sending inquiries, he said. Some ask whether Ashmere requires military assistance. Others believe your arrival signals the beginning of a territorial dispute. Ethan rested one hand against the old map lying between them. Then we should answer them immediately with the truth. We will, Adrian replied. Unfortunately, rumors travel on imagination. Truth travels on paper. Queen Eleanor poured fresh tea into Amelia's cup before offering a reassuring smile. History has a habit of becoming dramatic long before it becomes accurate. Amelia appreciated the kindness, yet she could not ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside her. She walked toward the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens, where fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Everything outside remained peaceful. Children laughed in the distant courtyards. Gardeners tended blooming roses. White doves circled above the palace towers. It seemed impossible that the rest of the continent might already believe two kingdoms stood on the edge of conflict. A soft knock interrupted the silence. An elderly royal historian entered carrying several weathered scrolls secured with faded blue ribbons. He bowed respectfully before placing them beside Ethan's outdated map. Your Majesties, he said, I searched our oldest archives after hearing how this misunderstanding began. Carefully unrolling the brittle parchment, he revealed ancient border drawings stretching back hundreds of years. Amelia leaned closer, fascinated by the changing rivers, forests, and mountain trails marked by generations of careful hands. The great river has changed its course 3 separate times, the historian explained. Every change forced both kingdoms to redraw their borders. Most travelers never noticed because the official roads moved with them. Only forgotten paths like the one you followed remained exactly where they had always been. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. So the trail itself never crossed the border. The border quietly crossed the trail. The historian smiled. An elegant way to describe it, Your Majesty. Before anyone could continue, another messenger entered, this time carrying reports from northern villages. Adrian read the first page before looking toward Ethan with renewed curiosity. There is something unusual, he said. Several small communities near the mountains have reported strangers appearing over the last few weeks. They arrive without warning, ask detailed questions about our border patrols, then disappear before dawn. Amelia turned from the window. Merchants. Perhaps, Adrian answered slowly, but none of them traded anything. They only listened. Ethan exchanged a thoughtful glance with him. People rarely study borders unless they expect those borders to matter. The room grew quiet once more. No one rushed to conclusions, yet everyone sensed the same unsettling possibility. While two kingdoms struggled to explain an innocent mistake, someone else might already be using the confusion for reasons of their own. Outside, evening. Shadows stretched across the palace gardens as another messenger hurried through the gates, carrying fresh reports from the northern frontier. This time the concern on his face was impossible to miss. The messenger barely paused to catch his breath before bowing deeply to both kings. Dust covered his boots, and the long ride showed plainly in his exhausted expression. "Your Majesties," he said carefully, "our northern watch stations have confirmed unusual movement along the mountain passes. No villages have been harmed, but several observation towers reported unfamiliar groups traveling through abandoned trails that have been empty for generations." King Adrian accepted the report and slowly placed it beside the others. "Do they carry the colors of any known kingdom?" The messenger shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. They avoid every major road. Whenever scouts approach, they disappear into the forests before anyone can question them." Silence settled over the chamber once again. Amelia noticed Ethan studying the collection of reports instead of speaking immediately. She had learned long ago that whenever he became unusually quiet, he was fitting together details other people had overlooked. Finally, he looked toward the weathered border maps spread across the table. "Every report mentions forgotten roads," he observed. "The same forgotten roads that led us here today." The elderly historian slowly nodded. "Most people stopped using those routes decades ago after the rivers changed." Ethan traced one faded trail with his fingertip, which also means very few people still watch them. Adrian's expression became thoughtful. Someone who understands the old maps could move across these mountains without attracting attention. Amelia felt a quiet chill despite the warmth of the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. What had begun as an embarrassing travel mistake was revealing something much larger hiding beneath the surface. Queen Eleanor noticed her concern and gently rested a reassuring hand over hers. "Whatever is happening," she said softly, "it is better that we discovered it together than separately." Amelia smiled gratefully. "Perhaps that is the only fortunate part of our unexpected visit." Ethan stood and walked toward the wide balcony overlooking the city below. From there he could see Ashmere's peaceful streets stretching toward distant hills where the ancient forests began. Families wandered through marketplaces. Children chased one another beside sparkling fountains. Musicians played cheerful melodies in the town squares. None of them knew that old mountain paths were suddenly becoming important again. Adrian joined him beside the balcony rail. "You came here by accident," he said quietly. "Yet if you had remained inside your own kingdom, neither of us might have connected these reports." Ethan nodded. Sometimes history begins with careful planning. Sometimes it begins because someone trusted an outdated map. Both men shared a brief smile before returning inside. They agreed to send small groups of experienced scouts from both kingdoms to quietly observe the abandoned mountain routes together. Not soldiers preparing for conflict, but trusted rangers familiar with the wilderness and the changing rivers. Cooperation, they decided, would reveal far more than suspicion ever could. As evening approached, Amelia and Queen Eleanor walked through the palace gardens where roses climbed white stone walls and lanterns slowly flickered to life beneath ancient trees. "Your husband carries responsibility with remarkable calm," Eleanor said. Amelia looked toward the palace balcony where Ethan and Adrian continued studying maps beneath the golden sunset. "He believes panic clouds good judgment," she replied. "He always says that the loudest rumor is rarely the closest to the truth." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Then perhaps your kingdoms are fortunate to have found friendship before misunderstanding became fear." At that very moment, far beyond the palace walls, one of the newly dispatched scouting teams reached an abandoned stone bridge hidden deep within the northern forest. There, carved into weathered rock beneath layers of moss, they discovered fresh markings that had not been there a week before, proving that someone had indeed been quietly traveling roads the rest of the world had forgotten. Morning sunlight spilled across the palace courtyard as the first scouting team returned from the northern forests. Their boots were damp with dew, and fragments of green moss still clung to their cloaks. King Adrian, Ethan, Amelia, and Queen Eleanor gathered around a large wooden table where the scouts carefully placed sketches of the mysterious markings they had discovered beneath the abandoned stone bridge. The symbols did not resemble the language of Ashmere or Blackwood. They formed neat circles connected by narrow lines, almost like someone had been quietly mapping forgotten routes instead of claiming territory. The elderly historian adjusted his spectacles and leaned closer before slowly shaking his head. These are older than any royal record I have studied, yet these particular carvings are fresh. Someone copied ancient symbols only days ago. Ethan studied every detail without speaking. Amelia noticed the familiar, thoughtful expression returning to his face. He was no longer seeing individual clues. He was beginning to see the pattern connecting them all. They are following places the rest of us stopped watching, he finally said. Adrian nodded, which means they expected everyone to focus on the official borders instead. One of the scouts stepped forward respectfully. There is something else, Your Majesties. We found signs that several different groups traveled the same paths, but never at the same time. Whoever organized them wanted to avoid attracting attention. Amelia exchanged a glance with Queen Eleanor, almost as though they wanted people to discover only scattered pieces of the truth. Ethan looked toward the ancient maps covering the table, and scattered truths often become dangerous rumors. At that moment, another visitor arrived, though this one carried no military report. A gray-haired village elder from the northern hills had requested permission to speak after hearing about the strange discoveries. Adrian welcomed him into the council chamber. The elderly man removed his worn hat and bowed politely before pointing toward one faded section of the oldest map. When I was a little boy, he began, my grandfather warned us never to use these forgotten trails after sunset. He said travelers would sometimes hear voices encouraging them to spread frightening stories from one village to another. He believed panic could travel farther than any rider. Several advisors exchanged uncertain looks, but Ethan listened with genuine interest. Did your grandfather ever explain who those travelers were? The old man smiled gently. No, Your Majesty. He only said that some people gain more from confusion than from peace. The words lingered in the quiet chamber long after the elder finished speaking. Amelia suddenly realized that every event since crossing the river had followed exactly that pattern. An outdated map had caused an innocent mistake. Rumors had transformed it into an imagined invasion. Unknown strangers had quietly observed forgotten borders. Fresh symbols had appeared where almost no one traveled anymore. None of the pieces alone seemed extraordinary, but together they painted a very different picture. Adrian folded his hands thoughtfully. It appears someone hoped our kingdoms would distrust one another before we ever had the chance to speak. Ethan smiled faintly. Instead, they accidentally arranged our first joint investigation. Amelia could not help laughing softly at the irony. Their unexpected vacation had become something neither kingdom had anticipated, yet it had also created an alliance built not on fear, but on honest conversation. Outside the palace windows, bells rang peacefully across the city as another clear morning began. Hidden somewhere beyond the northern mountains, however, whoever had carefully planted confusion was still unaware that the two rulers they expected to stand apart were now searching for the truth side by side. By the following afternoon, representatives from both kingdoms gathered beneath a circular pavilion overlooking the river that had unknowingly changed the course of history years before. The same quiet water that had carried Ethan and Amelia across an invisible border now reflected two royal banners standing side by side, instead of facing one another from opposite banks. Fresh maps covered a long oak table while surveyors, historians, village elders, and experienced rangers compared old records with new observations. Amelia watched them work with growing admiration. No one argued over pride. They argued over facts. King Adrian smiled as one elderly surveyor triumphantly matched an ancient trail with its modern location. It seems, Adrian said with quiet amusement, our ancestors left us more mysteries than instructions. Ethan laughed softly. Then perhaps we should leave the next generation something easier to understand. Together the two kings approved a new official map that clearly marked every river, bridge, forest path, and forgotten trail connecting their kingdoms. More importantly, they agreed that the abandoned mountain routes would no longer remain neglected. Joint ranger patrols would quietly monitor them, not because either kingdom feared the other, but because both now understood that empty places often attracted people who preferred to remain unseen. Queen Eleanor turned toward Amelia as the final seals were pressed into warm crimson wax. You realize this meeting would never have happened if your vacation had gone according to plan. Amelia smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. I keep thinking about that old map folded inside Ethan's saddlebag. It caused so much confusion, yet somehow it also brought everyone to the same table. Nearby, the elderly historian carefully rolled the outdated parchment closed before placing it inside a carved wooden case. It belongs in the royal archives now, he said kindly. Not because it is correct, but because one day people should remember why accurate maps matter. As the afternoon passed, messengers departed in every direction carrying identical letters signed by both kings. Each message explained exactly what had happened. There had been no invasion, no secret campaign, no territorial dispute. Two rulers had simply crossed an outdated border by mistake while traveling together, and that mistake had uncovered forgotten roads requiring shared attention. Amelia noticed how relieved everyone seemed once the truth no longer belonged to whispers alone. Honest words, she realized, often traveled more slowly than rumors, but once they arrived, they lasted much longer. Before sunset, Ethan and Adrian walked together to the riverbank where the accidental crossing had begun. New stone markers already stood waiting to be placed, carved with both kingdoms' emblems instead of only one. Ethan rested a hand against the smooth granite. These will help travelers avoid our mistake. Adrian smiled warmly, and perhaps remind them that borders can separate kingdoms without separating neighbors. As workers carefully positioned the first marker beside the gently flowing river, villagers from both sides gathered to watch. Children laughed together without caring where one kingdom ended and another began. Farmers exchanged seeds for the coming season. Merchants discussed future trade routes. The atmosphere felt less like the conclusion of a diplomatic misunderstanding and more like the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Amelia stood quietly beside Ethan, slipping her hand into his as the evening breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and river water through the valley. She looked at the peaceful gathering before them and realized that sometimes the greatest victories were not won through displays of strength, but through the simple willingness to listen before judging and to speak before assuming. Several months later, autumn returned to the valley where everything had unexpectedly begun. The river still flowed with the same quiet rhythm, but now elegant stone markers stood proudly along both banks, each engraved with the crests of Blackwood and Ashmere side by side beneath a simple inscription that welcomed peaceful travelers. What had once been a forgotten crossing had become a symbol of cooperation known throughout the neighboring kingdoms. Merchants traveled the newly restored roads with confidence. Families explored the forests without wondering where old borders had disappeared. Rangers from both kingdoms shared maps, discoveries, and stories beside evening campfires, proving that trust could grow stronger when it was tended with patience. Ethan and Amelia returned to the valley exactly as they had promised. This time they traveled with updated maps, a small escort that remained respectfully behind, and considerably more teasing from their closest friends about choosing vacation destinations more carefully. Amelia laughed as she unfolded the beautifully illustrated map prepared jointly by both royal courts. This one has far fewer surprises, she said. Ethan smiled while pretending to study every line with great seriousness. I refuse to trust any map until I verify that every river has agreed to stay where it belongs. Amelia gently nudged his shoulder. I believe that is impossible. Then I shall continue being cautious forever. They left their horses beside the river and followed the same narrow path where wildflowers swayed beneath the afternoon breeze. Nothing about the landscape seemed extraordinary, yet everything felt different because they now understood how one ordinary moment had quietly changed the future. Nearby, children from villages belonging to both kingdoms played together beside the water, inventing adventures that paid little attention to borders adults had spent generations debating. One little girl recognized Ethan and Amelia before running toward them with a cheerful smile. My teacher says you started the friendship trail, she announced proudly. Amelia exchanged an amused glance with Ethan. Actually, she admitted gently, we were simply trying to enjoy a vacation. The little girl tilted her head thoughtfully. Then maybe the best things happen when people are not trying to make history. Ethan smiled warmly. I think your teacher would agree with that. As evening settled across the valley, lanterns illuminated the riverside while musicians from both kingdoms filled the air with gentle melodies. King Adrian and Queen Eleanor soon arrived, greeting their friends not with ceremony, but with genuine affection. Together they watched the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, while villagers celebrated another successful harvest festival shared across the once uncertain border. Adrian quietly raised a cup of warm cider. "To outdated maps," he said with a grin. Eleanor laughed. "Only this once." Amelia shook her head, smiling. "To honest conversations." Ethan lifted his cup last. "And to never assuming the worst before hearing the truth." Their cups touched lightly beneath the first stars of evening. Later, as the celebrations faded into peaceful laughter behind them, Ethan and Amelia stood alone beside the river where their unexpected journey had first crossed an invisible line. Amelia rested her head gently against his shoulder. "Do you realize," she whispered, "our quiet vacation became the story every historian will remember?" Ethan looked toward the calm water reflecting the moonlight and smiled with the same warmth she had fallen in love with long before crowns and kingdoms had defined their lives. "Perhaps," he answered softly, "but my favorite part of the story is much smaller than that." Amelia looked up. "What part?" He squeezed her hand. "That I still kept my promise. I took my wife on a trip we will never forget." She laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful river beneath the autumn sky. And together they walked home along the path where one simple mistake had become a lasting reminder that true strength is gentle. Honest hearts can rewrite history. And sometimes the smallest unexpected step can lead two worlds toward a brighter future.